The 7 levels of crazy Avengers Doomsday theories explain. Level 1, complete MCU rewrite. Iron Man was always Dr. Doom. This theory proposes that Tony Stark and Victor Von Doom have always been the same person across the MCU timeline, with Robert Downey Jr.'s casting as Doom serving as the ultimate reveal rather than mere stunt casting. According to this interpretation, every appearance of Tony Stark throughout the Infinity Saga was actually laying groundwork for a character who would eventually be revealed as having Doom's consciousness, motivations, or destiny embedded within him from the beginning. The theory suggests that moments of Tony's arrogance, his willingness to play God with technology, and his famous "I am Iron Man" declaration were never about heroism, but about a deeper megalomaniacal truth waiting to surface. The fundamental problem with this theory is that it requires retroactively invalidating 15 years of character development and emotional storytelling. Tony Stark's arc from selfish weapons manufacturer to self-sacrificing hero who snaps away, Thanos represents one of the MCU's most carefully constructed narratives, with clear progression shown across Iron Man, The Avengers, Iron Man 3, Age of Ultron, Civil War, and Endgame. To claim he was always Doom would mean his redemption was illusion, his sacrifice was manipulation, and his relationships with Pepper, Peter Parker, and the Avengers were fundamentally dishonest. Marvel Studios has built its entire emotional foundation on earned character growth, making this theory not just improbable, but antithetical to the MCU's core storytelling philosophy. While comics have explored Tony Stark becoming Dr. Doom in alternate timelines like the Iron Maniac storyline, those explicitly operate as cautionary what-if scenarios rather than mainline continuity, and applying that retroactively to the MCU would undermine everything the franchise has built. Tony Stark was adopted. This theory centers on a timeline discrepancy noticed in Avengers Endgame during the 1970s time heist sequence. When Tony inputs the coordinates into the time-space GPS, he specifically enters July 4th, 1970, yet encounters Howard Stark excitedly discussing his pregnant wife, despite Tony's canonical birth date being May 29, 1970. The theory interprets Tony's momentarily confused expression during this scene as evidence that he subconsciously realizes something doesn't add up about his own origin. Drawing from Marvel Comics' Earth 6116 continuity, where Tony Stark is indeed adopted after Howard's biological son Arno, originally named Edward in earlier stories, was born with health complications, this theory proposes that the MCU's Tony was similarly adopted, and the baby Howard expected in July 1970 was the biological Stark child who either died or never came to be. The theory extends into more speculative territory by suggesting Victor Von Doom was somehow the intended child of that July 1970 timeline, creating a twisted parallel where Doom and Tony represent divergent outcomes from the same origin. This would provide motivation for a multiversal Doom to confront MCU's Tony Stark, or his legacy, with existential horror about identity and destiny. However, this theory struggles with both evidence and narrative purpose. The timeline discrepancy could simply be a production error or intentional vagueness about pregnancy timing, rather than a carefully planted seed for a massive reveal. More critically, even if Tony were adopted, Marvel would need to establish why this matters to the Doomsday story and why it's being revealed now, rather than during Tony's lifetime when it could have affected his character arc. The theory assumes Marvel is playing an impossibly long game with a detail most viewers never noticed, banking on a reveal that would primarily serve to complicate a dead character's legacy rather than drive the current story forward. While comics Tony being adopted adds interesting complexity to his relationship with Howard, importing this into the MCU post-mortem feels more like retcon than revelation. Level 2. Fan Edit Origin. Doom removed from Fantastic Four. This theory emerged from fan-made video edits featuring Pedro Pascal's Reed Richards delivering fabricated dialogue to Doom, including lines like, "I was there until you decided I wasn't," and "You didn't defeat me, you revised reality." The core concept proposes that during the events of the upcoming Fantastic Four film, Dr. Doom won't simply be defeated through conventional means, but will instead be erased from the timeline entirely by Reed Richards using reality-altering technology or magic. This theoretical act would transform Doom from a villain who lost to one who was systematically unmade, creating motivation for his appearance in Avengers Doomsday as a being seeking restoration of his existence and revenge against the man who decided he shouldn't exist. The theory attempts to align with the MCU's established precedent of reality manipulation having lasting consequences, citing Loki's branched timelines, the memory alterations in Spider-Man No Way Home, and the multiversal chaos in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. However, this theory's foundation rests entirely on fan-created content rather than official Marvel material, making it speculation built on speculation. While the emotional concept of Doom being written out provides compelling motivation and would certainly differentiate him from standard MCU villains, there's no legitimate evidence from casting announcements, set photos, or official marketing suggesting this storyline. The theory also faces practical problems. If Reed erases Doom so thoroughly, why would other characters remember him? How does Doom return with memories intact? The mechanics required to make this work would demand extensive exposition that could bog down both Fantastic Four and Doomsday. Additionally, making Reed Richards, traditionally Marvel's heroic genius, into someone who plays God by erasing people from existence risks undermining his heroic status before audiences even properly meet him. A strange choice for a character Marvel is positioning as a major MCU pillar going forward. The Doom Impostor. This theory proposes that the Victor Von Doom appearing in Avengers Doomsday isn't the real Doctor Doom at all, but rather an imposter, clone, or variant pretending to be Doom for unknown purposes. The theory suggests Robert Downey Jr.'s casting supports this interpretation. Rather than Doom wearing Tony's face through multiverse coincidence or variant logic, the being audiences will meet is actually someone else entirely masquerading as Doctor Doom, potentially to manipulate both heroes and viewers into false assumptions about motivations and identity. Some versions of this theory speculate the imposter could be Mephisto finally making his MCU debut, using Doom's identity as a disguise, while others suggest a rogue AI or Skrull could be involved. This theory exists in the territory of pure speculation without meaningful evidence, built more on distrust of straightforward announcements than on actual clues. While Marvel certainly has history with misdirection, from the Mandarin twist in Iron Man 3 to fake Thor deaths to Boner in WandaVision, those twists served specific thematic purposes within their respective stories. An imposter Doom twist would require Marvel to introduce the real Doctor Doom later, essentially wasting audience introduction to one of Marvel's greatest villains on a fake-out that satisfies no one. The theory also misunderstands why Marvel cast Robert Downey Jr. in this role. It's precisely because of his Tony Stark history that having him play Doom creates immediate dramatic tension and audience investment. Making him not really Doom would deflate that casting choice completely. Furthermore, Doctor Doom's character in comics derives power from his genuine belief in his own superiority and righteousness. An imposter pretending to be Doom lacks the philosophical weight that makes the character compelling. If Marvel wanted an imposter villain story, they wouldn't burn their Doom introduction on it, making this theory highly improbable despite being technically possible in a franchise that includes shapeshifters, LMDs, and variant madness. Level 3. Indirect connection. Doctor Strange made Doom. This theory suggests that Doctor Strange's actions in Multiverse of Madness or No Way Home inadvertently created the circumstances that transform Victor Von Doom into the threat he becomes in Avengers Doomsday. The theory points to Strange's increasingly reckless use of reality-altering magic, casting the spell that broke the multiverse open despite Wong's warnings, using the Darkhold to dreamwalk, and his general pattern of believing he knows best despite catastrophic consequences. According to this interpretation, one of Strange's magical interventions either pulled Doom from his original timeline, corrupted an otherwise non-villainous Victor Von Doom, or created the multiversal instability that allows Doom to access powers or knowledge he shouldn't possess. The theory draws some support from comic book precedent, particularly the Triumph and Torment storyline by Roger Stern and Mike Mignola, where Doctor Strange and Doctor Doom engage in an uneasy alliance involving magic, demons, and Doom's mother's soul. That story establishes that Strange and Doom can be narratively linked through mystic arts, and that Doom's magical abilities often intersect with Strange's domain. However, making Strange directly responsible for creating Doom undermines both characters. Strange has already been positioned as someone who causes problems through arrogance in his origin film Infinity War, where his plan leads to the snap, and Multiverse of Madness, adding also created the next big bad to his list of mistakes, risks making him incompetent rather than tragically flawed. For Doom, being a byproduct of Strange's error rather than a self-made genius sorcerer dictator diminishes what makes him compelling. Victor Von Doom's power comes from his own brilliance, determination, and belief in his superiority. Making him Strange's magical accident reduces him to a symptom rather than an agent. While Strange and Doom will almost certainly interact given their shared magical expertise, positioning Strange as Doom's creator requires too much coincidence and undercuts both characters' agency in ways that don't serve the larger narrative. Wonder Man theory. This theory connects the introduction of Wonder Man in the MCU to laying narrative groundwork for accepting that Victor Von Doom can appear with Tony Stark's face. The Disney Plus series Wonder Man introduces Simon Williams, whose comic history includes being a rival to Stark Industries and whose powers involve his consciousness and body being fundamentally altered through scientific experimentation. In Marvel Comics, Wonder Man's brain patterns were used by Ultron to help create Vision's artificial consciousness, establishing precedent for identity, appearance, and consciousness being transferable, copyable, or separable from original sources. The theory proposes that by showing audiences a character whose identity can be duplicated or whose appearance doesn't necessarily match his consciousness, Marvel is preparing viewers to accept the concept that Doom wearing Tony's face via Robert Downey Jr. can make sense within MCU logic. The theory gains some credibility from the timing of Wonder Man's release, arriving the same year as both Avengers Doomsday and Vision Quest, creating a thematic trilogy exploring what makes someone real when identity becomes data. If Vision Quest explores Vision's struggle with having consciousness pieced together from multiple sources, and Agatha all along dealt with magical identity and transformation, then Wonder Man completing that trilogy by showing scientific identity transfer makes thematic sense. However, this theory assumes a level of audience attention and metatextual thinking that may not be necessary. Most casual MCU viewers won't make connections between a Disney Plus show about a relatively obscure character and the mechanics of why Doom looks like Tony Stark. They'll simply accept multiverse variants as explanation or trust that the movie will clarify. The theory also gives Wonder Man perhaps too much narrative weight. The show could simply be exploring interesting character concepts without serving as prerequisite viewing for understanding Doomsday. While Wonder Man may contribute to broader MCU themes about identity, and Marvel may be intentionally scheduling these projects together for thematic resonance, suggesting the entire purpose of introducing Wonder Man is to justify Doom's appearance, feels like attributing more strategic planning than necessary. Still, if the show does explicitly deal with brain pattern transfer or identity duplication, the theory becomes more viable as subtle audience preparation. Level 4. Ambiguous evidence. Trailer timestamps. This theory analyzes the numeric codes that appear at the end of the brief. Avengers Doomsday teasers released by Marvel, interpreting them not as dates, but as timestamps pointing to specific moments in Avengers Endgame. According to this interpretation, the Steve Rogers-focused teaser shows the code 12420, which corresponds to 1 hour, 24 minutes, and 20 seconds into Endgame, exactly when the Ancient One explains branch timeline mechanics to Bruce Banner. The Thor teaser's code 17720 allegedly points to Loki shapeshifting into Captain America. The X-Men teaser's code 1120 supposedly indicates the moment Rocket tells Thor he can still help save his family, while another timestamp at 10420 points to Rocket asking Scott Lang if he wants to go to space, beginning the time heist. The theory argues, these timestamps tell a cohesive story. All the indicated moments involve the Avengers justifying reality manipulation for seemingly good ends, suggesting Avengers Doomsday will force them to face consequences of those decisions. If accurate, this would be remarkably sophisticated marketing, hiding coordinates to thematic warnings inside what appear to be release date announcements. However, this theory rests entirely on numerical pattern recognition that may be coincidental rather than intentional. The Russo brothers calling these releases stories and clues encourages this kind of analysis, but without confirmation, viewers might be finding meaning in random numbers. Even if some timestamps align with meaningful endgame moments, that could be selection bias. With a 3-hour movie, almost any timestamp will land near something symbolically relevant if you look hard enough. The theory also doesn't explain what viewers are supposed to do with this information if true. Does knowing these connections change how Doomsday will be experienced? Or is this elaborate scavenger hunt its own reward for dedicated fans? Until Marvel explicitly confirms or denies the timestamp interpretation, this remains in the realm of compelling pattern recognition that could be either genius marketing or sophisticated pareidolia. Doomsday already happened. This theory reinterprets the countdown clock in Doomsday marketing material, proposing it's not counting down to an event, but counting down from one. The foundation comes from Loki's transformation at the end of his Disney Plus series, where he becomes the living anchor of the multiverse, existing outside linear time with the ability to perceive all timelines simultaneously. The theory suggests that from Loki's perspective, as a being existing in all moments at once, Avengers Doomsday has already occurred, Doom has already won, and what audiences will watch is Loki's desperate attempt to change that locked outcome before it becomes permanent across all reality. The countdown represents not time until catastrophe, but time remaining before reality crystallizes into an unchangeable state. This theory draws on the Loki series, establishing that time works differently for beings like He Who Remains, and now Loki himself, who exist outside the normal flow of causality. In the comics, various stories feature characters like Kang, Immortus, and Doctor Doom, viewing time non-linearly, experiencing future defeats while still in their subjective past, creating scenarios where battles are fought not to prevent disasters but to undo ones that already happened from certain perspective. The theory also provides an explanation for why Doomsday marketing feels fragmented and non-linear. We're seeing pieces of a completed puzzle from the perspective of someone trying to rearrange them. However, this theory faces the challenge of clarity. The MCU has increasingly complex timeline mechanics, and making Doomsday a story told entirely from Loki's non-linear perspective risks alienating casual audiences who simply want a straightforward Avengers adventure. The theory also raises questions about stakes. If Doomsday already happened and Loki is trying to change it, doesn't that guarantee he'll succeed since we know Secret Wars follows Doomsday? Unless the point is that he fails, making Secret Wars the locked timeline where Doom's victory becomes permanent. The ambiguity of evidence makes this theory intriguing, but difficult to prove or disprove until the film releases. Level 5. Multiverse logic. It's Cap's fault. This theory assigns blame for the coming catastrophe to Captain America's decision at the end of Avengers Endgame to stay in the past and live a full life with Peggy Carter before returning as an elderly man to pass on his shield. While presented as a happy ending for Steve Rogers, multiverse mechanics introduced in Loki: No Way Home and Multiverse of Madness suggest that any temporal interference creates branch timelines and potential instability. The theory proposes that Steve's choice to remain in the past didn't just create a single alternate timeline, but rather triggered a cascade of overlapping realities that eventually led to an incursion. The catastrophic collision of two universes occupying the same space, which in Marvel Comics' 2015 Secret Wars storyline served as the apocalyptic threat that destroyed the entire multiverse. The theory positions Doctor Doom not as a traditional villain, but as someone who correctly identified Captain America's sentimental choice as the variable that destabilized reality, and who now views himself as the only one willing to make the hard decision to fix it. This reframes Doomsday as a philosophical conflict rather than simple good versus evil. Doom believes the Avengers are too emotionally compromised to do what's necessary to save reality, while the Avengers see Doom as a tyrant, using crisis as justification for totalitarian control. The theory gains credibility from Marvel Comics' Time Runs Out storyline, where the Illuminati, including Iron Man, Doctor Strange, and Black Panther, face incursions and must make terrible choices about which Earths to destroy to save their own universe. In those comics, Captain America is expelled from the Illuminati specifically because he refuses to accept that killing billions might be necessary, establishing precedent for Steve's moral absolutism being presented as dangerous in crisis. The Endgame time travel scene has always been controversial among fans who debate whether the film follows its own rules, with some arguing Steve created a branch timeline while others insist he was always Peggy's husband in a closed loop. The Loki series firmly established that unauthorized timeline interference is considered dangerous enough to warrant pruning by the TVA. Yet Steve's timeline alteration apparently faced no such intervention. This theory elegantly explains that discrepancy. It wasn't pruned because the damage was already done, setting up multiversal instability that wouldn't manifest until later. The theory also provides emotional weight by making the coming catastrophe a consequence of a hero's choice to prioritize personal happiness over cosmic responsibility, which feels thematically appropriate for the MCU's tendency to explore the costs of heroism. Whether Doom is ultimately right or wrong about Steve causing incursions, the theory fits established MCU multiverse mechanics and provides clear causal connection between past films and Doomsday's conflict. Level 6. Strong foreshadowing. Rune King Thor. This theory proposes that Thor's character arc across the MCU has been building toward his transformation into Rune King Thor, a comic storyline where Thor sacrifices everything to gain understanding of the primordial runes that govern reality itself, ascending to a level of power beyond even gods. The groundwork appears in Thor Ragnarok when Odin tells Thor, even when you had two eyes, you'd only see half the picture, echoing Norse mythology where Odin sacrifices his eye for wisdom. In Marvel Comics' Avengers Disassembled Thor storyline by Michael Avon Oeming and Andrea DeVito, Thor follows a similar path of sacrifice, hanging himself from Yggdrasil for 9 days to gain knowledge of the runes, ultimately achieving power sufficient to alter fate itself and break the cycle of Ragnarok. Thor's MCU journey systematically strips away false power to prepare him for this ascension. In Ragnarok, he learns that godhood comes from within, not from Mjolnir. In Infinity War and Endgame, he collapses under the weight of failure and grief, experiencing ego death before rebuilding himself. In Love and Thunder, he redefines what it means to be a god, not a conqueror but a protector. And the film ends with him raising a daughter, literally named Love, symbolizing the humility and sacrifice required for true cosmic understanding. The vision sequence in Age of Ultron showed Thor encountering the Norns and Yggdrasil imagery directly tied to the rune path in comics, which seemed random at the time but now appears to be deliberate foreshadowing. Kevin Feige has called Thor a unique case as the only MCU character to survive multiple complete reinventions, suggesting his arc isn't finished. If Avengers Secret Wars truly features God Emperor Doom with reality-warping power stolen from the Beyonders, as in Jonathan Hickman's 2015 Secret Wars comic, then conventional superhero strength won't be sufficient to challenge him. Rune King Thor exists at a conceptual level beyond traditional power. He understands the fundamental code of reality and can rewrite universal rules, making him potentially the only MCU character capable of operating on Doom's level. The theory suggests Avengers Doomsday serves as the crucible that forces Thor's final transformation, with Secret Wars showcasing his ultimate sacrifice. As Rune King Thor, Chris Hemsworth's continued enthusiasm for the role and Marvel's investment in his character support the idea that Thor's story has a planned climax rather than just continuing indefinitely. The foreshadowing is strong enough and the narrative logic sound enough that Rune King Thor feels less like wild speculation and more like educated prediction based on established patterns. Level 7. Comic-backed and MCU setup. Loki's multiversal army. This theory draws directly from Marvel Comics' Avengers Forever series by Jason Aaron and Aaron Kuder, where Loki serves as Avenger Prime, protecting the multiverse from Doom Supreme, a version of Doctor Doom attempting to conquer all realities. In that storyline, both Loki and Doom Supreme assemble armies pulled from across the multiverse, with Loki recruiting variants including Captain Carter, a Phoenix Force-empowered Wolverine, a cosmic Ghost Rider, and even the Infinity Thing, a version of the Thing made from Infinity Stones, while Doom commands variants of Thanos, Killmonger, and an army of conquered timeline Dooms. The theory proposes that Avengers Doomsday will adapt this framework, with Loki using his position as the god of stories and anchor of the multiverse to recruit every surviving Avenger variant he can find. This theory benefits from multiple layers of support. First, the Loki series explicitly ended with Loki becoming a multiversal guardian who can perceive all timelines simultaneously, placing him in exactly the position Avenger Prime occupies in comics. Second, Marvel has already introduced the concept of multiversal variants assembling with the Illuminati in Multiverse of Madness and variant Spider-Man in No Way Home, establishing precedent for cross-reality team-ups. Third, casting announcements and rumors for Doomsday include returning actors from previous non-MCU Marvel films, suggesting variant characters will appear. Fourth, the upcoming Fantastic Four film is reportedly set in an alternate 1960s timeline, meaning that team will already be established as variants when they appear in Doomsday. The theory also explains why Avengers Doomsday may feel structurally different from previous Avengers films. It's not about a single team defending Earth, but about Loki coordinating a multiversal resistance across multiple fronts. This would justify the reported massive cast and scope while maintaining narrative coherence through Loki's perspective as the organizing force. In Avengers Forever, the multiversal war doesn't end with a clean victory, but rather delays the inevitable, buying time before the ultimate confrontation, which aligns perfectly with Doomsday leading into Secret Wars as the true finale. The theory even has thematic resonance with Loki's character arc, from selfish trickster to someone who literally holds the multiverse together and organizes its defense, completing his transformation from villain to hero. With both direct comic precedent, MCU, setup from Loki's series, and practical production evidence supporting it, this theory stands as the most probable major structure for how Avengers Doomsday will function narratively. If you enjoyed exploring these wild theories from the completely impossible to the seemingly inevitable, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the MCU's greatest mysteries.